So, my name's Dr. Janet Kyriakides, as Sharon said, and let me first introduce you to the great Greek physician Hippocrates, who lived on the island of Kos 270 years before Christ. He is reported to have said, "Let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food." And that's really the theme of my talk today, which is the role of food or nutrition in cancer prevention. So the talk will be about 25 minutes, and I'll introduce initially a little bit more about myself. I'll talk very briefly and simply about what cancer is, the causes of cancer, how common cancer is, the evidence for cancer promoting foods, and what foods we can add into our diets that could be cancer protective. So why am I doing this talk? I was a GP for over 20 years at Ilkley and Wharfedale Medical Practice, which I really loved. And in the last, what would I say, 10, 15 years, started to develop an interest in nutrition, clinical nutrition, for various reasons, but some of those reasons were related to the fact that patients who had a diagnosis of cancer often would ask me after this diagnosis what was safe to eat, what was not safe to eat. And I felt really that my training was not, I wasn't equipped to answer some of those questions. So I went on a number of courses, mainly related to nutrition and cancer survivorship, but also it did include food as medicine generally. And this was useful information, and I have used that a lot with family, friends, and I did at work use this information. More recently, as I was winding up at work last year, I did study and certify in lifestyle medicine, which includes nutrition. It also includes physical exercise, restorative sleep, and stress management, which are all the pillars that keep us well, basically, with our health on a good, even keel. So having learned all of that, I didn't want to just keep that to myself. So now I'm diverting that information that I've learned, that education, into health promotion, really, and trying to help other people make healthy choices for their lives. So I would basically say, though, I am not a clinical nutritionist, nor am I like a cancer specialist. I am a generalist. So this talk is fairly broad. It's not a scientific presentation. So if you're wanting biochemistry and complicated slides, you're not going to get that really. It's more of an overview and giving you some guidelines to choose to live by if you wish to. So moving on. What is cancer? Some people on the call may not really know. So cancer is when abnormal cells in the body multiply out of control. Normally, the body's really clever. It's an amazingly made thing, the human being, in that cells repair and replicate in a very controlled manner, usually. But when cancer develops, for whatever reasons that would be, as you can see in this slide, you get a funny tissue. It looks funny in this picture, and that's just multiplication of cells out of control. And this doesn't happen sort of quickly. It is a process. Cancer doesn't come out of the blue. It starts early, and we call this carcinoma in situ. That's the very early stages of cancer, and it spreads locally first, as some of you may know who've had cancer. Then it spreads a bit further, and then if the process is not detected either by top left, if this is not detected by medical tests or by our own immune system filtering out these cancer cells, then it can spread more extensively. Speakers on. So the reason I mention about the progress of cancer, I can hear someone speaking, by the way. Someone needs to turn their microphone off. Your earphones in, is that stopping it? No. So anyway, so the stages of cancer, why this is important is that lifestyle medicine, what we eat and how much exercise we do, can have some effect upon the progression of cancer, and some cancers actually can let's say, reduce, or certainly not advance as quickly by the way that we live. So that's to give you hope, really, I would say, on that point. So what causes cancer? There are a number of causes. Genetics is one of those reasons, and there may be people on this call who are worried because they think they have a strong family history, which it's possible that they do. Genetics only is responsible for 5 to 10% of cancers. Lifestyle, how we eat and drink, and if we smoke, and etc. This is responsible more for at least 40%, and some sources even say 70% of cancers are due to the way that we're living. There are environmental factors such as ultraviolet light gives us skin cancer, ionizing radiation from the atmosphere gives cancers, pollution in water pollution, microplastics, asbestosis, etc. There are many other causes, but today I'm going to concentrate on nutrition as part of lifestyle, because that's something that all of us, we make food choices throughout the day, at least 3 times a day, and probably many more times than that. So it's something we can think about and we can consider. So cancer is the second commonest cause of death after cardiovascular disease. It accounts for 1 in 6 deaths globally, and the commonest cancers in men are prostate, lung, and colorectal. And in women, these cancers, the commonest are breast, lung, and colorectal. These 4 mentioned cancers account for 50% of all new cancer diagnoses. As we age, the rate of cancer goes up as we get older, and this is probably due to the fact that our immune system weakens and does not detect these abnormal cells that are being produced. But having said this, there is a concerning increase in people under the age of 50 developing cancer. This is thought to probably be due to our increasingly sedentary lifestyle, reduction in fibre that we eat, and the increase in processed foods in our diets now. I will speak a bit more about this later on. 1 in 2 people have a cancer diagnosis during their lifetime. So on this call now, there may be people who have had that diagnosis. There may be people that you know within your family who have had that diagnosis, or you may be someone who really does not want to have that. This talk is appropriate for all of you. So we're bombarded with health information all the time, really, on the news, on our telephones, and the radio, and we have to filter through this, really, and be careful what we believe and what we read, really. So I'm going to try and give you some of the evidence that is from reputable sources about foods. Initially, I'm going to talk about foods that are cancer promoting. So the first group of foods I'm going to mention are processed meat, which the World Health Organization has designated this group of foods as being class 1 cancer-producing agents. This means that they've seen a direct relationship between eating processed meat and developing especially colorectal cancer, stomach cancer, and pancreatic cancer. You may be asking, what is processed meat? This is meat that's been treated such that it's been smoked or salted, cured, or fermented. And if in the process nitrites and nitrates, which are chemicals, are there, then these are harmful to the human body and cancer promoting, basically. So the processed meats, you probably all know what those include, but these would be chorizo, they would be ham, salami, bacon, hot dogs. Now, sausages is a debatable one. Most sausages, especially ones that we buy from the supermarket, they are processed. If you get a high quality sausage from your butcher, then it's possible that they don't contain nitrites and nitrates, so they may be more healthy to eat. So moving on to another concerning food, this would be red meat, which includes pork, beef, and lamb. These have been classified as group 2 cancer-causing foods, meaning they probably cause cancer, and that's usually colorectal cancer again. These meats are very inflammatory, and they're especially harmful if they are barbecued. In that process of being charred on the barbecue, chemicals are produced that are definitely quite carcinogenic. So the more red meat we eat, the greater the risk in terms of cancer of the colon. So if having heard that, any of you are now a little bit worried because you have red meat frequently or processed meat frequently, I just thought through some tips maybe to reduce this would be at least consider having red meat on less days a week. You could swap from red meat to white meat versions such as chicken or turkey. Or if your family, for instance, really enjoy meals such as chili con carne or spaghetti bolognese, you could still have some red minced meat within this, but you could use half the amount, for instance, and then bulk the rest of the recipe up with more vegetables, lentils, beans, minced corn or minced soya, or more mushrooms, which have all got more healthy properties. As a way of reducing the quantity of red meat, and maybe slowly you could move across to a vegetarian version in the end, maybe if that's palatable to yourself. And if within your home, maybe you have children who really love sandwiches with ham, for instance, consider other options that you could try. That there are vegan alternatives to these ham, which are they're fair, they're reasonable. You could also have a white meat, for instance, instead, or cheese, or egg, or tuna, which they don't have risks with regard to cancer. And it's the quantity that's eaten really is the problem, and the frequency. So trying to cut this down will benefit everybody and anyone. The next substance to move on to, which I know is not strictly a food, but alcohol goes along with food often when we have meals out or meals at home. We know that alcohol is also designated as a class 1 carcinogen. It causes 4% of all cancers. And there's about 7 cancers that we can attribute to alcohol. These are not just cancers where the alcohol is in contact with the body, like the mouth and the upper throat, the larynx and the esophagus. Cancer of the breast, which is common in women, is often due to drinking too much alcohol. Apparently 2 units of alcohol a day, which equates basically to 1 medium glass of wine a day, has a higher risk of breast cancer than HRT. And bowel cancer also is related to the alcohol content that we take. Alcohol damages the DNA in our cells and stops our cells repairing. So basically, with regard to alcohol, there is no safe limit in terms of cancer. For every alcoholic drink we take, we're increasing our cancer risk by 7 to 11%. And as I said on the slide before, 1 in 10 cases of breast cancer in the UK are attributed to regular alcohol. So if now you're thinking, oh, I do like my glass of wine or lager, for instance, I'd suggest that as a beginning, you perhaps keep a drink diary just to document and see the quantity and frequency that you do take alcohol. And if you're somebody who likes a drink, perhaps after a busy week or a stressful event, the first thing they recommend is trying to delay that first drink. And then even asking yourself, is it an alcoholic drink that I actually need? And down the left side of this slide, I have a mnemonic that we use for the triggers for reaching out for addictive behaviours. And we can use this for alcohol, really. The H stands for when we're hungry, or I would put in there even possibly thirsty. That might not be very applicable to alcohol. A stands for when we're angry, anxious, or stressed, and that is often why people take an alcoholic drink. L can be when we're lonely, or could put bored in there, lonely or bored. And T, as if we're tired, people can resort to taking alcohol. And if any of these resonate with yourself, I would recommend that you perhaps think of other behaviours that you could put in place of alcohol, such as a walk around the block, or I don't know, have a nice bath, or read a nice book, or ring a friend, because, as I say, alcohol is extremely toxic to the human body. If social drinking is something that you enjoy, consider on your next social event alternating alcoholic drinks with soft drinks, or consider diluting your drinks with sparkling water, or having a smaller measure of alcohol, a smaller glass of wine, or a lower percentage beer, for instance. And if drinking at home is something that you do, consider having in the fridge some pleasant, chilled, non-alcoholic wines or non-alcoholic beers or soft drinks that you could still use as that relaxing habit when you get home, if that's when you take those drinks. But I would just say that any habit is very difficult to crack immediately, and so just avoid all or nothing thinking. If you do fail, you know, don't give up, just try again. And alcohol is something that we do know causes a lot of harm. So the next topic to move on to is obesity. We know that obesity is responsible for 5% of cancers. This is because fat cells in our body release chemicals which put the body into a chronically inflamed state, and this situation is what make cancer cells replicate and divide. And again, on the slide, you'll see the different cancers involved. But once again, post-menopausal breast cancer is very much linked to women being overweight, and bowel cancer is also in this category for men and women. So to try to avoid becoming overweight would be to try to limit high fat, high sugar foods, would be to avoid sugar sweetened drinks because they're calorific, as is alcohol, and avoid ultra processed foods, which the next slide I'll explain a bit more about these foods. So processed foods are something we hear a lot about on the press, and basically food is categorized into different degrees of being processed. So we have the green column, which are unprocessed foods, which are like your whole foods, like vegetables and fruit and milk and eggs. They're considered minimally or unprocessed. And then you have other degrees of processed foods. Bread is considered processed to some degree. So are tinned and canned foods. But we're most concerned about the red column of foods, which are known as ultra processed foods. These would be foods that when you see them in, for instance, the supermarket, would on the back, they would have a really long list of ingredients, and many of the contents of this ingredients, we don't even know really what they are. They're chemicals that make no sense to some of us. And these would be preservatives, emulsifiers, colorings, food in taste enhancing substances, and many of these are harmful to our gut health. The problem with the ultra processed foods are that they are high in calories, they're full of fat and sugar generally, and salt. They're low in nutrients, they're low in fiber. And so for that reason, when we've eaten a meal which is ultra processed, we will not feel full. So we tend to want to eat more, and we do generally consume more calories when we're eating these foods, which are shop bought foods. And there's pictures of them there. This would be pizzas and cookies and crisps and ready-made meals. So in an ideal world, we'd avoid those, but that isn't practical always. So just, I guess, just be aware of their limitations and try to minimize them and have them, like these foods, as treats, and try to have more foods from the green and the yellow and the orange column as much as is possible. So having told you the things that are concerning, let's move on to what we can add into our diet that may reduce our risk of developing cancer. There is no one superfood that you could eat on a daily basis, and that alone and you wouldn't develop cancer. That's not how nutrition or diet works. And there's no one supplement that you could take and you'll never get cancer. However, I would say that the Department of Health recommend that all of us in the UK take vitamin D from the month of October right through to the end of March. And this is for general health reasons, but I would actually advocate you take this for protection of cancer, because vitamin D is increasingly being shown to be an anti-inflammatory substance, and studies seem to be showing that people who develop cancer, 70% of them are deficient in vitamin D. So if we know it's a good vitamin to take anyway for our bones and for our immunity, if it may protect us against cancer, then surely this would be a beneficial thing to take. So what evidence do we have regarding other cancer protecting foods, sorry? We know that people who eat a diet rich in variety of fruit and vegetables, at least 30 different fruit and veg a week, so that does include spices and herbs. We know that vegetarians and vegans have lower rates of cancer. And we know that people who eat the Mediterranean style diet also have lower chronic diseases, including cancer. And the Mediterranean diet would include colourful fruit and veggies, lean protein, fish, olive oil, legumes, which would be beans, peas and lentils, and a low amount of red meat and a low amount of dairy. So foods that we know also have beneficial properties are the brassica family of vegetables, which if any of you are gardeners, you'll know which they are, but these include broccoli, cauliflower, kale, cabbage, sprouts. They seem to contain a compound which may be beneficial to protect us against cancer. So if you like those, try to have, really, if you could have one of those types of vegetable a day, could be really helpful, especially if you've had a hormone dependent cancer. They're thought to be helpful for those cancers. Probably a lot of you are aware that cooked tomatoes contain a product called lycopene. If we have 3 to 4 portions a week, if you're a man, you could, by doing this, reduce your risk of prostate cancer potentially. Another really powerfully beneficial fruit is pomegranate, and other green tea and coffee have been thought to have properties that reduce cancer. I'm just going to mention mushrooms here, in that if you lived in Japan or China, they use dry mushroom extracts alongside their conventional oncology treatments. In the UK, I don't think we do, as far as I know, but we could certainly eat a wide variety of mushrooms if you enjoy those, because they definitely have many health properties. And soya is now thought to be beneficial with regard to cancer protection. A few years ago, the opposite was thought. Women with breast cancer were told not to take soya because studies showed that it seemed to promote cancer in mice, I think, or rats. That has now been disproven for humans, and it seems that soya, which contains natural plant estrogens, actually could protect women against breast cancer, and maybe men against prostate cancer. There's not conclusive evidence, but it seems in many studies that women who've had breast cancer, if they swap their dairy milk to soya milk, it may reduce their risk of the breast cancer recurring. So that's something to consider if there are any women there who on this call now who've had breast cancer. So we're advised to eat a rainbow plate of food. The reason for this being, really, all these beautiful colours of the fruit and veg contain different, what are called phytochemicals or polyphenols, and these are really powerful, really, in their antioxidants, or in another word, they're anti-inflammatory. So they counteract a lot of the harmful agents that cause our bodies to be inflamed, such as sugar and alcohol and red meat, for instance, they counteract that and can protect us against cancer. So the more colours on our plate, the better, the more healthful. And these can be frozen fruits or veg. They still have benefit, tinned equally. And if we can, try to eat the skin or the peel of fruits and veg, because within the skin and the peel are a lot of the healthy chemicals, as well as the fibre. These fruits and veg, they don't have to be expensive exotic products. For instance, a simple apple, which is about 30 pence, has so many within its skin, especially so many chemicals that can be protected to our health, as has a simple carrot. So, including all of these and having variety is really the key to this. And the fruit and veg feed in our gut the microbes that are living there. I'll just very briefly touch on this. In our gut, we house trillions of microbes, which include bacteria, viruses, and fungi, and they coexist with ourselves, and they benefit us. And if we feed them what they thrive on, such as fruit, veg, and fibre, which I'll come on to in a moment, the fibre side of things, we get a good diverse growth of microbes, and they produce what are called short chain fatty acids, and these reduce inflammation in our body, and as well as potentially reducing chronic diseases, they could or should reduce cancer. But also there is growing evidence that there is a link between our gut and our brain, and they could potentially reduce mental health issues such as depression, anxiety, and dementia. So this is something to bear in mind. So moving on now to another food that we should include in our diet. This is fibre. We know that people who have a diet high in fibre have reduced rates of colorectal cancer. So it is recommended that we have 30 grams of fibre a day. And my next slide after this will show you what this equates to. And if we were to, the average person only takes, in the UK, only takes about 15 to 20 grams daily. So if we tried to boost this by another 10 grams by eating another apple a day and a banana and a handful of nuts, this might reduce our risk of colorectal cancer by 10% and possibly reduce our risk of breast cancer by 5%. If you are thinking to do this and you're not used to much fibre, then introduce the fibre slowly, because too much fibre quickly can give you some abdominal wind and discomfort, and equally increase the amount of fluid, especially water, with the increased fibre. So this slide just shows a picture of how you could achieve 30 grams of fibre in a day. So for breakfast, you could have a whole oats cereal with some fibrous fruits such as raspberries, which are really high in fibre. For lunch, you could have a salad with some legumes such as chickpeas or soya beans, for instance, or some brown rice. That's quite fibrous. And then instead of at snack time having a biscuit, you could have an apple and a handful of nuts, and that would give you fibre. And then with your evening meal, whatever you have as your protein, you could add alongside this a fibrous vegetable like broccoli or a baked sweet potato, which they're more fibrous than white potatoes. So again, when we're thinking of swapping from white refined carbohydrates to high fibre ones, we're thinking of all the brown whole grain versions. So whole wheat pasta, brown rice, wholemeal, whole grain bread, oat cereals instead of the refined cereals like Rice Krispies or Special K, for instance. And you may be already doing all of these, and that's good. But if you know that your family at the moment are enjoying white pasta or white rice, it is possible to slowly introduce them for instance, with rice, you could cook half a pan of, put this all in the same saucepan, but half of white rice and half of brown. And often people don't really notice, and then you can slowly increase up to the full saucepan of brown rice over a period of weeks, and people get used to the texture and the taste. And in the same manner, if you really enjoy sourdough bread, which I know that's very fashionable at the moment, they do make a whole grain version of that. So you still get the benefits of the sourdough, but you get more fibre with the brown version. So this is just another slide to show you other high fibre foods. So all seeds are very fibrous, as are all the beans and peas and lentils. Nuts are full of fibre, as are mushrooms. That's partly why they're very healthful for us. And all fruit and veg consist of fibre. So we could add these extra veg, beans, seeds and nuts to soups or salads, or have them as snacks. My challenge to you now that you're listening to this talk would, and if for any of you who are thinking,
in the car,
if any of you are probably thinking you don't have enough fibre, I would challenge you on your supermarket shop to buy a couple of new different vegetables or a new fruit, or consider buying a bag of mixed nuts and trying those instead of a biscuit at snack time. This slide shows now how our plate of food should look. They're recommending now that we have half a plate of vegetables or fruit, and a quarter of the plate would have our protein source. So that could be meat, fish, eggs, a vegetarian alternative, a vegan alternative protein, and a quarter should be a whole grain carbohydrate. So just summarising really a lot of what I've already said, the World Cancer Research Fund recommendations are as follows. I'll sort of try to abbreviate these. They recommend, if we followed these steps, by the way, this would reduce all of our risk of getting cancer. And if we've already got cancer, it would reduce the risk of it recurring. So they recommend limiting fast and processed foods, eating whole grain, mainly plant-based foods, preferably cooked at home, avoiding or limiting processed and red meats, limiting or avoiding alcohol, limiting sugar sweetened drinks, and keeping a healthy weight. And they add into this, which I know this talk is on nutrition, but they add in being physically active 150 minutes a week, which for some of you on this webinar, you may be achieving that. For those of you who are not able to, or who have a very busy life or sedentary job, for instance, I would just encourage you to just try to move more within the limits that you have. The more activity, this does reduce risk of cancer. We do know that. So if we were to follow the World Cancer Research Foundation's recommendations, according to them, if it would protect us against developing cancer by about 30%. And if we've already had cancer, it might reduce our risk of it recurring. And apparently it would reduce our risk of dying by 52%. By following those points on the slide previously. And also it would reduce chronic diseases such as heart disease, stroke, dementia, and we probably would age a lot better, so there's a lot of benefits to trying to follow these as closely as we can. So I've just finished with a mnemonic that if it were a live talk, I would get you to shout out what the different letters stand for, but this is not possible. But G stands for greens. So and if we eat all of these, by the way, as often as we can, preferably daily, this will really prevent us getting cancer, hopefully. So G stands for greens. B stands for berries, because berries are full of antioxidants. And so they counteract some of the inflammation taking place in our body and reduce cancer cells that might be trying to develop. O stands for onions, leeks, and garlic, and these are known as prebiotics, and these are fibrous vegetables which get through to our colon, and they feed the microbes living there and enable the good ones to thrive well. And then if they thrive well, then they look after us basically by producing those short chain fatty acids and reducing inflammation in our body. The M stands for mushrooms, which I mentioned as being very beneficial. They contain vitamin D, they contain fiber, but they also contain other chemicals that could be anti-cancer. The other B stands for beans. Beans contain natural estrogens, which are not harmful like synthetic estrogens. They contain fiber, they make us feel full, and so we tend to eat less so that they are beneficial. The S stands for seeds, spices, herbs, and nuts. And I would mention here the spice turmeric seems to have good report as to being anti-cancer. And simple herbs out of our garden like parsley, oregano, basil, for instance, they have many, not just vitamins, but many chemicals within them that seem to really be protective for our health. Having said all of this and told you what you should be avoiding and what we should be adding in, I do realise food is not just about nutrition. It is also a social experience that we like to enjoy with friends and family and special occasions. And this lovely afternoon tea is something that certainly I like to enjoy on a special occasion. I'm hoping, by the way, if my family are listening, Mother's Day, this I might have a nice afternoon tea. So it's not an all or nothing situation, really. Well, there may be some of you who are eating perfectly, but I would aim for 80% eating as well as you can and 20% having treats if possible. And if you are eating well, then just keep doing so. That's really good. But for those of you who know that you're perhaps far from the recommendations mentioned so far, I would just say pick one thing from this talk that you know that is a small step that you could implement, like for instance, buying a bag of nuts, for instance, and eating those instead of a biscuit, or choosing a new vegetable this week that you're going to try. Just start small and something achievable and then build on that really. So I finished back on the island, the Greek island of Kos, where I went last October with my husband. And I leave you with the two ancient Greek physicians. One is the founder of medicine, Hippocrates, and the other is my dear husband, who has to put up with me telling him what's good for him to eat and what's not good. And I think he must get fed up with that. But anyway, these are Hippocrates' words. Let your food be thy medicine, and let your medicine be thy food. Thank you so much for listening to my thoughts. And now we're going to go into a question time.